Hey everyone, it's Baron, and welcome to part 4 of the Novice Path for my Arc Ignite Elementalist build guide. In this path, I am walking newer players through the campaign and explaining game mechanics as they come up. Part 1 dealt with some pre-game tips and mindset orientation. Part 2 was a deep dive into a bunch of the mechanics the game introduces early, and then the quests of Act 1. Part 3 dealt with Acts 2 and 3, and now in Part 4, we're going to start with our first visit to the Eternal Labyrinth to ascend into being an Elementalist, followed by Act 4 and beyond. As you've noticed, every act I've said less and less about the actual quests you have to follow, since the game itself makes the quests pretty clear, and you can always double check with the Exile leveling tool if you're unsure. Instead, I'm focusing on the game mechanics and build-specific changes you might not be familiar with, and that continues here as we discuss the Labyrinth. As previously stated, you can do this either before the Act 3 final boss or sometime early in Act 4. You can wait longer if it's really giving you trouble, but you will be giving up a lot of damage and delaying the gem changeover that I'm going to talk about later in this video. When you choose to do this, you can find the portal to the labyrinth near the top of the Act 3 town, and it will only open once all 6 trials have been completed. Once you visit the labyrinth for the first time, you can teleport there using its waypoint. As a reminder, every one of the 6 starting classes has 3 choices of ascendancy or subclass, and you ascend to your chosen subclass by visiting this Eternal Labyrinth. You then visit the labyrinth again later with harder difficulty settings to add more and more points to your ascendancy tree, ultimately allocating up to 4 ascendancy notable skill points. We've prepared to enter the labyrinth, or lab for short, by completing those 6 trials scattered throughout campaign Acts 1 through 3. Each of the trials showed you some of the traps and mechanics you will encounter in the lab. The other key feature of the lab is that it is what you might call a mini-hardcore experience. In other words, if you die within the labyrinth, your progress will be lost in the labyrinth only, not the whole game, and the area is then reset in the way that a campaign zone would be reset if you left it for 15 minutes or more. So you cannot die. If you do, you will be reset. You need to have built yourself pretty tanky and play pretty carefully, or you risk having to play through the labyrinth multiple times. Additionally, you should be sure to bring some life flasks with you that have the feature of negating bleed and corrupted blood, since many of the traps in the labyrinth will inflict bleeding. It is a potent damaging debuff. It will cause your health to suddenly and quickly plummet. Now, if you have trouble getting an anti-bleeding flask, you can use Einhar's optional bestiary mechanic to craft a flask with that mod. This was a great tip that was brought up in the comments section of the previous video, so thank you for that. The labyrinth isn't just a dangerous area damage-wise, it's also laid out differently than any area in the game. It's meant to mimic a maze, after all, hence the name. And now, luckily, for this first trip to the labyrinth, it starts off pretty simple. But when you do come back at higher levels, which you'll need to do, it will have more and more rooms every time you come back, and those rooms will have more complex interactions, more pathways between them as you go. So now, on your first trip, is a good time to get used to the way the rooms kind of fit together. You cannot just blindly enter any door that you find. You need to make sure that you are making forward progress. And the easiest way to see whether you're doing that is to check these little map icons that you can see labeled current location. These exist as pillars at every room's entrance and exit. The map pillar at a room's exit will show you lines that represent all the possible exits from that room, and the exit you're currently at will be highlighted with a green line. You will be able to see a few things about the room that you would be entering if you choose to do so. First of all, and most crucially, you can see whether you're about to enter a room you've already been in. That's a good thing to know. Also, the icon of the room will tell you whether it's a normal room, a boss room, a room that has a silver key in it, which will always open a nearby silver door that contains a few rewards, just that kind of thing. Now, in future harder labyrinths, there will be other types of rooms that will get added in, but for the moment, those are pretty much the only ones you need to worry about. Now, additionally, the map will show lines coming off of the room you are about to enter that indicate how many exits that room has, though you will not yet see where those exits go. You will have to get to that exit to see that much. When you get to the other side of the door, when you pass through one entrance to the next room, keep in mind you can go back immediately if you want. You're not like trapped in that room. If you get in there and you go, oh wait, I've already been here, or I don't want to be here, you can always go back. So no worries about that. But when you get there will be another current location map. It'll be identical to the one that you just saw at the previous exit, but this is just helpful so that you can double check, make sure that you're not in a room that you've already been, that kind of thing. Now, ultimately, you are looking for the boss rooms, represented by skull icons. These are called Aspirant's Trials. There are 3 of these in every labyrinth. No matter how complex the maze is, no matter how difficult it is, you are always making your way to the 3 Aspirant's Trials. Now, when you first enter this Aspirant's Trial, you are actually in a safe antechamber, or outer room, with access to your stash, and on your first trip, you will also see a crafting recipe. This crafting recipe will allow you to craft resistances of increasing magnitudes on your gear the harder the labyrinth is. And this is just kind of a way that the labyrinth gives you of, if you fail, you can, once you leave the labyrinth, you can craft these onto your gear and get a little stronger, that kind of thing. But you can take this time in the safe antechamber to clean up any gear swaps you need to do, gem swaps. If you need to make any deposits from your inventory into the stash, you can take a breath at this point if you need to. But from here, you will enter the big double doors to face the boss, Izaro. Now, every lab at all difficulty levels, like I said, will have exactly 3 of these rooms where you face Izaro and his green goddess. They're kind of a dual boss. She is linked together with him on his back. You will grind down his hit points in the first and second encounters, and then finish him off in the third encounter for the privilege of going into the Ascendancy Chamber. Now, Izaro is big and slow, but he does have some powerful slam attacks, so definitely keep your distance from him and watch the way he is moving. Getting hit by any of his slams, including his leap slam from across the room, is bad news. Luckily, even his leap slam is slow. If you see it coming, you can dodge out of the way even while he's in midair. Just keep an eye on him. Meanwhile, as he's doing this, the green goddess on his back is firing off various energy attacks. She's summoning monsters, and she'll even occasionally create a portal that will teleport you around the arena if you stand in the green portal too long. You don't want to do that because it could potentially teleport you into danger, basically. So if you are going to die in the labyrinth, odds are it's probably going to be either to a bleed trap or getting smacked in the face by Izaro, frankly. So stay on your toes during this boss fight. There is something that you can do to help yourself, though. Scattered hidden throughout the lab are some side areas. They will be visible on your mini-map, but there will be no visible door in the actual graphics of the area. Like as your character is wandering around, you're not going to see a door. It'll just be that your mini-map, you'll say, hey, wait a minute, why does my mini-map show a little area off to the side? I can't see that. Once you find something like that, just kind of hover your mouse over the wall a little bit, or if you are on, a controller, you could just kind of walk back and forth along the wall until your cursor highlights a switch that is hidden in the wall. You hit the switch, and often behind those doors, you will find what's called a mysterious dark shrine. It will have a random effect on you, always good. That's important. It'll never have a negative effect on you. Some of these effects will mimic the effects of normal shrines, things like speed, health, regeneration, armor, except they will last the entire rest of the labyrinth run. They have no expiration until you leave the lab. Others will have effects that boost the rewards at the end of the lab, while still others have effects like lowering damage from lab traps that can be very handy, especially in the later difficulty levels. In any case, though, once you have beaten Izaro for the 3rd time in this labyrinth, you will get to enter the Ascendancy Chamber, and it contains 3 types of rewards. The first type is a series of treasure chests, and the number of them that you can open up depends on how many keys you found in the labyrinth, exploring little side passages, that kind of thing. These chests aren't going to give you anything game-breaking. They're not crazy. You're not going to make a ton of money off of this, especially on your first trip to the lab. But it's a nice way. You might get a little bit of equipment. You might get some some crafting currency, some basic stuff. So it doesn't hurt to open these, for sure. The second reward type is the Divine Font. This is an object that lets you choose from some semi-random effects to modify your skill and support gems. And now this is the only way in the game to get what are called transfigured gems, but we don't really need to worry about that too much in this build, since we will use the normal non-transfigured version of the Arc gem. The other things that the font can do is add quality or experience to a gem. This is very helpful. Experience levels up the gem, making it more powerful, while quality adds specific bonuses which you may not have encountered until now, actually, since quality currency for gems is pretty rare, the Gem Cutter's Prism. So this may well be the first time you have an opportunity to add quality to Arc. Our Arc skill in particular will it'll gain an extra chain at the end of its effect if you can get the gem quality all the way to a maximum of 20. Quality does not do anything for Arc, unlike some other skills, until you get it to 20. It does not round up. So getting an extra chain is actually useful both for clear and for single target damage, since hits that are earlier in the Arc chain have more damage depending on how many chains are remaining. So this is a win-win for us in all scenarios. The third and final reward is the real reason we're here, though, of course, our Ascendancy, which you can pick up at the top right of the room. Each of your 4 visits will award you 2 Ascendancy points towards this new little skill tree. But since all of the notable effects are separated by a small node, this effectively means that we get to take 1 notable per lab, up to 4 eventually. Every lab you will take 1 small and 1 large. For now, we will ascend to become the Elementalist, and we will select our first node, Shaper of Flames. This is where a lot of the support gems that we've been taking and leveling up finally come to fruition. And this is where we will buy any of these gems that we weren't able to pick up before. We can start using all of the damage over time related support gems for Arc. These are shown in the Path of Building. We can also use Flame Surge, Wave of Conviction linked to Combustion, and then once you have allocated Whispers of Doom on your passive tree, that's coming up soon in the Path of Building, you can then start including the Flammability Curse as well. Since we are already cursing with Elemental Weakness, we will need Whispers of Doom in order to be able to apply a second curse. And so we can include Flammability as soon as we do that. We will probably want to be linking Flammability, Elemental Weakness, and Flame Surge to the Arcanist brand gem, so that you can just cast the Arcanist brand and it will automatically cast 3 skills for you. Much easier. So these are basically just a lot of different debuffs to click during tough fights, though when Arcanist brand comes online pretty soon, that is going to reduce the number of clicks we're going to need. It just probably won't be available right at the moment you complete the labyrinth. It'll probably be a few levels later, but it is coming soon. Now, as you can see from the Shaper of Flames node, this is going to entirely change the way that we are trying to deal damage. Up until now, we have been trying to scale the spell hit from Arc. Now, though, we will be focusing on an Ignite, which is caused by that hit. Now, if you haven't seen any of my videos where I describe this, very briefly, Ignite is an ailment that deals damage over time for a few seconds based on the damage of the hit that causes it, though ignoring any modifiers to spell damage. So if that initial hit is stronger because of some increased spell damage, cool, that's great for the initial hit, but that spell damage doesn't count towards the hit for the purposes of calculating the Ignite. So that's important to realize. We don't need that spell damage anymore. It doesn't really do anything for us. Now, only 1 Ignite can be on an enemy at a time, but we still do want to hit enemies as often as possible. We want to hit them multiple times, because every time we hit them, we roll the dice and we're fishing for a stronger Ignite. Remember, damage rolls within a range, so we always want to fish for the stronger Ignite, and the game will give us the benefit of the doubt. It will always apply the strongest Ignite at any given time. So to repeat, we will stop caring about increased spell damage on our weapon and anywhere else, but we will still care about any kind of flat added elemental damage, or actually, as long as it's damage to spells, it could even be physical damage. It doesn't matter. It's just probably going to be elemental. So cold, lightning, fire. If it says add X to Y number of added elemental damage to spells, Great. Those are great things for us. Increased lightning damage is good for us. Percent increased fire damage is good for us. All great. Now, the percent increased lightning damage, that works because unlike spell damage, percent increased lightning damage does in fact contribute to that initial hit of the ignite. It's a confusing distinction that they've made, but that's just the way that it is. So increased lightning damage helps, and then of course increased fire damage helps for us because once the ignite is inflicted, it is all fire damage. So regardless of whether the ignite was started by lightning damage, cold damage, physical damage, it doesn't matter. With Shaper of Flames, all those can contribute, but once the ignite is started, it's all fire damage at that point, baby. So increased fire damage also works for us. And at this point, we will also start caring about any modifiers to damage over time and damage over time multiplier. So this is a little bit in the weeds, but just in case you're confused about the distinction between those two things, increased damage over time works just like increased fire damage, increased ignite damage, just percent increased. It all takes place at the same level of the damage calculation. Damage over time multiplier is different than percent increased damage over time. Damage over time multiplier takes place later in the damage calculation, meaning that it takes everything that came before it and it multiplies that. So you probably have very few sources of damage over time multiplier, and that makes it very powerful. Every little bit of it that you get is another multiplier onto your skill. In any case, our next skill tree, which becomes active now that we make this changeover, leans fully into fire damage over time, fire damage over time multiplier, ignite speed, all these different mods. And so the ignite speed, it causes the same amount of dot damage to be dealt over a shorter period of time. So it's a big ignite boost, it's a big DPS boost at the minor cost that you have to inflict ignites a little bit more often, but honestly, you're probably hitting the enemy more often than you need to for an ignite anyways, so ignite speed is going to, in almost all circumstances, be a strict DPS boost and a pretty big one. In terms of skill gems, we can start using supports that benefit, like I said, damage over time, and as soon as Ignite Proliferation becomes available, that's another support gem, it will become available soon, like Arcanist Brand. You should immediately include Ignite Proliferation in your Arc setup for dramatically improved clear speed in dense monster areas. Now, it does not directly add a lot of damage, so if once you've included Ignite Proliferation, if you feel that your single target damage, your boss damage is lacking, you can always, at a moment's notice, sub that out, for like a boss fight and include something like added lightning damage, and that will shore up your single target damage. And that brings us to the end of the Labyrinth talk, but as we start Act 4, I will remind you that if you have not yet gotten the Mana Reservation efficiency to swap your auras to Malevolence and Determination, now is the time. Get that Mana Reservation efficiency on your tree as soon as you can if you don't already have it. You would only want Malevolence for Ignites anyway, so you wouldn't necessarily have swapped over to that until just now at the start of Act 4. It's not going to do anything until we make this swap. So the other thing to note is that you definitely need to be on the lookout for 4 linked items. If you don't have one for Arc already, this is crucial. You really need that 4 link. The sooner the better. For Act 4, I have 2.5 of my usual cautionary notes about backtracking or inefficiency. The first note is that in an early quest area called the Mines, you will want to accomplish both major objectives before going back to town, or you could wind up backtracking a ton. I make this mistake every once in a while, and it's a killer. You need to free the spirit of Desharet. This is one of your quests, and that's in the Mines level 2. All you have to do is touch her. There is a little mini boss nearby you can fight if you want. It is not necessary for the quest. All you have to do is touch Desharet. But the temptation here will be to immediately go back to town and get your reward. Don't do it yet. Resist the temptation. Keep pushing through the mines to the Crystal Veins. That is the next area that has a waypoint. Do not make the mistake of either skipping Deshret and going straight to the Crystal Veins, because that'll suck. And also don't make the mistake of touching Deshret and then immediately exiting. Both of these will cause you to have to completely re-travel through the mines, both level 1 and 2, neither of which have a waypoint. It's a killer. I promise you don't want to do that. Second up on these efficiency or backtracking tips, this is Nico. You will find the NPC named Nico in Act 4, and he will ask you to do a quest in the mines. Now, this is a cool little bit of theming by Grinding Gear Games to have Nico show up in the actual campaign area called the Mines, since his side quests have to do with another mine area, but technically he can show up anywhere. He's not related to the campaign in any way. I want to drive that home. His inclusion in this mine area and the fact that his optional mechanic is also related to some mines, just some different ones off to the side, it's tricky. It has fooled many players, including me when I first played, into thinking that he's just a part of the campaign. But in fact, he is just yet another optional endgame mechanic. He's part of a previous League mechanic that got rolled into the core game just to give the endgame more diverse options to farm. But he is not a main campaign quest. He's not even a campaign side quest. He is just a totally unrelated mechanic. And the reason I bring this up is because being found in these mines creates the illusion that you have to do all of his quests to proceed. But in a hilarious turn of events, you can't really, because his mechanic is literally infinite. If you tried to finish what he assigned you, you might just keep going forever. Delve is famously the infinitely scaling mechanic. And even after completing his initial set of quests, to run a bunch of content and figure out a bunch of mechanics and navigation that will not matter to you until and unless you decide to really explore the Delve mechanic. I made this mistake myself and wasted just really an embarrassing amount of time my first league because I thought that I couldn't advance the campaign until I had checked off all his quests and delved down to the bottom of the mine. Nope, don't make that mistake. You can, hey, if you want to go over there just as like a little side thing to do, feel free, but don't get caught up because it literally goes on forever. Fair warning. The final half of a note on the topic of time savings. I said there was 2.5 notes on time savings. The final half note concerns the branching sections that you take right after the mines. Right when you get to the Crystal Veins. This is around halfway through Act 4, and you have to go down 2 very long branching paths to Duresso's Dream and Kaum's Dream. You have to do both of these. They are among the more drawn-out parts of the entire campaign. They are often narrow paths that put you into sight of most of the monsters in the area, and all of that taken together means that there will be a lot of monsters and the temptation to kill them all because they're all right there. But they are all on approximately the same level. For 2 very long areas, there's going to be a lot of monsters on the same level. And what that means is that this is probably the area in the game that has the highest chance of trapping players into over-leveling by a lot if you kill everything in your path. Now, if you don't mind being over-leveled, feel free to kill everything. But as mentioned in an earlier video, being over-leveled does come with an experience penalty, so it doesn't do you as much good as you might think to be over-leveled, if that makes sense. And also, many of us find these 2 long areas pretty tedious, so it is perfectly acceptable, even encouraged, to run past or teleport through some of the monsters in these areas. There will be several portions of the Duresso's Dream area that will physically stop you and force you to kill monsters in order to advance, so don't worry about missing out on experience. The game will force you to take some of these monsters regardless, but if you kill literally everything in your path, you might be here a long while. You might feel that Act 4 drags on the longest of the acts. Other than that, the quests are pretty straightforward and self-explanatory, I would say. In terms of gem changes, though, an early quest called Breaking the Seal offers Sigil of Power as a reward. We should take this. This is yet another one of those many optional damage buffs that you can click if you are struggling with single target. You can optionally, at this point, include any of the golem gems that you want to purchase. I don't include these in my path of building. You can only summon one type of them, and they do require some minion investment, either via support gems or on the tree, in order to feel not squishy. They die pretty often. You could get around that problem pretty soon if you wanted, bringing us to our next topic, because what you could do is link them to cast when damage taken. This is another change that will take place during Act 4, and this is the reason that I didn't have you level Molten Shell in Act 3. Molten Shell is the primary thing that you want linked to cast when damage taken. The golem is totally optional, you don't need to worry about that. Cast when damage taken is a support gem that unlocks for purchase when you enter the Belly of the Beast area, which is near the end of the act. As you can see on the gem itself, it will automatically cast most spells linked to it, other than spells that physically can't be triggered by rule, when you receive a certain amount of damage in a short period. The damage counter or tracker will reset after a few seconds, so this needs to be kind of a spike of damage that comes in pretty quickly. This does come with a drawback, though. Cast when damage taken cannot cast any spells whose level requirements exceed its own. And this produces a conundrum, because the more you level cast when damage taken up, the more damage you have to take for it to activate. Leveling cast when damage taken and anything it supports turns into this kind of balancing act. We have to ask ourselves, on the one hand, how high of a level do we need the supported gems like Molten Shell? How high do we need that in order for it to feel useful? But also we need to ask, on the other hand, how low do we need cast when damage taken to be in order to activate often and feel useful? Molten Shell is a defensive buff, but it hardly does us any good if it doesn't activate until our health is below 25%. Molten Shell is not going to make us immortal. It just shaves off the worst of the damage. We want it to activate when we take a brief little spike of damage that signals that more damage could be incoming, like the first volley of hits from an incoming pack of enemies. So there are varying schools of thought on how high to level these gems, and in large part it comes down to the individual build, how far advanced it is and how much health it has, and then player preference. So you can feel free to mess around with this, but if you'd rather not think about it, if you just want the straightforward advice, for now, stop leveling them when cast when damage taken gets to level 2 and Molten Shell gets to level 8. If the little plus icons near the top of your screen, the top right of your screen, tempting you to upgrade them further, if those are bothering you, you can actually right-click on them with your mouse, not left-click, which would up them. It would cause them to level up. If you right-click on that button instead, they will go away, and they will be visible from your inventory menu if you ever decide to level them up further. They just won't be bothering you up at the top of your screen. But leveling them to level 2 and 8 respectively, that should be enough to keep you alive long enough to pop a life flask and then kill the things that are trying to kill you. When you reach maps and have more health, you may want to up this to level 10 Molten Shell and level 6 cast when damage taken. Now, another quick note on this topic. The strength of the buff does depend to some degree on the amount of the armor stat that you have. So if you are having trouble getting armor, big A armor, as in, armor, evasion, energy shield, if your armor stat is low, you may actually consider temporarily swapping out Molten Shell for a different guard skill called Immortal Call. It is very similar, but the trade-off is that it has less uptime. It reduces damage by more, it doesn't rely on armor, but it has lower uptime. So it's a trade-off. We can also link cast when damage taken to Purifying Flame for a source of consecrated ground and therefore health regen as long as we are standing on the consecrated ground. It is a shame that we can't level Purifying Flame too high, which would increase the radius of the consecrated ground, but later on we are going to be getting a pretty potent AoE bonus, area of effect bonus from our Ascendancy. But that is a lot of talking about cast when damage taken, and I don't want it to overshadow another important fact. Right at the same time this gem unlocks at the entrance to Belly of the Beast, as you remember, 2 other gems become available that we need. We talked about them a few minutes ago, Arcanist Brand and Ignite Proliferation. We will slot Ignite Prolif into our main skill setup immediately, always with the option to swap it out for single target damage if you find it lacking. And we will also link Flame Surge and Elemental Weakness, as I mentioned, to Arcanist Brand so that we can cast both at once. And like I said, once you get Whispers of Doom on your passive tree, you can get Elemental Weakness, Flammability, and Flame Surge all in the same setup, and just casting Arcanist Brand will cast all three. But that's not why this gem reward is so important. It's so important because this is it. This is it. The gem acquisitions are over for the campaign. Sure, there are some expensive endgame gem upgrades we can do to max out our damage, but that's going to be true of most builds, and for the most part, they're just going to be like special versions of the gems that we already have. But the important thing is that for the remainder of the campaign, you now have all of the gems that you need. That's pretty exciting. And honestly, it's one of the last things to say about Act 4. Once again, the game is pretty clear outside of the whole Nico business about telling you what needs to be done. Just follow NPC quest guidance and you will do just fine. The final boss of the act can be dicey, and he has killed plenty of hardcore players and wiped the character, but there's only a little bit of actual strategy to it, and we can go through that. The first is easy. Don't stand in anything that looks flashing and dangerous. It's pretty straightforward. He telegraphs a lot of his moves. If you are standing on something on the ground that looks dangerous, it probably is. Move. And then number 2, if he teleports on top of you, move away from him quickly because something is about to explode. He teleports on top of you. You have a beat, a pause to get out of the way, and then boom, something explodes. So teleports on top of you, move. Next up, in phase 2 of the fight, he will descend underground and he will raise up these bleeding heart things at the edges of the arena. And while those are alive, he cannot take damage. So whenever he raises one, you have to target it instead of him. It's not always it's not visually super obvious, but he is invulnerable during this time period. So if you realize you've been smacking him for a while and his health isn't going down, just double check that you don't have one of these hearts around the edge of the arena that you need to kill, and then he will become targetable again. And that is it. That will draw Act 4 to a close, and we will move on to Act 5. And honestly, Act 5 is short, it is straightforward, and you really only have one mission outside of advancing the linear quest line. And that mission is this. If your resistances are low, for God's sake, do everything in your power to get them up now. At the end of Act 5, we will suffer a permanent negative 30% to all resistances, and that is going to make Act 6 absolutely brutal unless we can get our resistances over the cap of 75% right now. No, getting them up to 85, 90, 95, 100%, it's not any better for the moment than having them at 75%. You have to do specific things if you want to raise your cap from 75, but just having them over cap now is an insurance mechanism. It means that at the end of the act, when we get that 30% debuff, it will not be absolutely crippling. Instead of going from 75 to 45, maybe you go from 105 down to 75, that kind of thing. So in order to do this, make liberal use of the crafting bench and feel free to be more aggressive than usual in picking up and identifying gear off the ground if your resistances are low. As usual, we are always looking for life on our gear too. That never hurts. Fortunately, one of our first quests in this act will reward us a choice of rings, and you could take one of the 2 stone ring options, preferably one that addresses your 2 weakest resistances. Now here in Act 5, we do have one minor new mechanic that gets introduced, and that is a broadened number of utility flasks. Until now, we've pretty much been only dealing with life and mana flasks plus Quicksilver to get around faster. Now though, you'll start seeing flasks that do things like massively boost individual resistances or crit chance, armor, evasion. But I'm going to be honest with you. Although eventually these will become extremely important to the build because there are a variety of ways to augment and even automate the use of these flasks, the thing is, for right now, I find their use to be tedious. Now that's me personally. if you do want a kind of like, oh shit, that's a lot of enemies button, and you don't mind playing what's called, the flask piano, where you're constantly going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on your keyboard every 5 or 7 seconds to keep them up in combat, you can use these right away. A granite flask in particular, I'm sure, will be a great defensive option that gives a lot of armor. So you may find that these help you, but I just don't want you to think that they are mandatory at this time. As for me, I usually pay more attention to these once I get to maps. This is dealer's choice, though. I just wanted to mention it. With that, though, you will make your way through these straightforward quests to the Act 5 boss, Kitava. He is a big boy, as you will see. His moves hit hard, but they're pretty well telegraphed. You get to the end of the fight, and you lose. Yep, that's right. Spoiler alert, there is an auto loss scripted into this fight after you've gotten his HP down low enough. Don't worry about telling the difference. You will be able to tell the difference between a normal death and this scripted defeat. You'll see it. It'll be clear. This defeat is the in-plot explanation for that negative 30% resistance penalty, and we take it right now. And that is it for Acts 4 and 5. My next video is going to be even more ambitious. I am actually aiming for that next video to be the last in this Novice series. It will get you to maps. I hope for it to cover all of Acts 6 to 10 and a brief introduction to mapping. I said I'd be speeding it up, right? There are a few new mechanics to introduce, but even fewer than before. I'll tell you about the next Labyrinth trials to pick up. I'll call out any really egregious backtracking risk points. I'll give a brief overview of each act boss, and I'll talk a bit about the last campaign passive tree that we'll be shooting to fill out, but that is about it for that next video. We're really just going to be doing a lot of the same types of things over and over that we've already been doing, and we're even going to be doing them in some, shall we say, familiar areas. But with that, I will leave you for now until the next video. Put any questions or comments down below. Thank you for tuning in, and take it easy.